So anyway, so the industries that use aluminum, like drink cans and also airplanes and other car manufacturers, they have been really hurting. So I wouldn't be surprised if that they put a lot of pressure on Biden to abolish that. And that is not surprising actually throughout history. That's usually how tariffs work. And then we put one in thinking we're tough and big and trying to punish somebody, and then turn around and realize we're shooting ourselves in the foot, so we lift it.
Well, actually, the article was saying that Trump had lifted it and that Biden re-implemented it.
Oh, Biden re-implemented it.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of curious.
I thought you said Biden lifted it. Yeah.
No, yeah, I was a little confused.
Okay. No, well, in that case, my guess would be that we're a big country or something, or there's something they're trying to put a political pressure on. You said UAE, that the country. Okay. Yeah. Do they even produce aluminum? I thought they only had oil and stuff.
I don't know.
Yeah. Then in that case, my guess would be it's political. We're trying to use this as a little screwdriver to turn up the heat and probably trying to pressure them into caving into something, right? So that would be my guess. Yeah, I haven't read the article, so I can't tell you for sure, but maybe I'll look into it. Thank you for bringing that up, though.
So I can't remember, but do we still have like a ridiculously large tariff against like Cuba? Because I remember during the Cold War and when Cuba was going through all that stuff, we threw up a bunch of tariffs against that country. Do we still have those up today?
So that is what we did with Cuba, and what we're doing with North Korea is called an embargo. So it's not just tariffs, but we use pretty much any means necessary or we have to completely shut down trade from a certain country, not just with us, but when we go and make sure they don't get to trade with any country almost. And that embargo was partially lifted when Obama kind of normalized the diplomatic relationship with Cuba. And I know Trump threatened to reverse that, but I honestly don't know if he actually did it or not. Because I know before Trump's left the White House, he was talking about he's going to reverse the diplomatic progress we've made with Cuba. So, but you're right. That's why, if you go to Cuba, they still drive cars from the 1960s because that's when the embargo kicked in, and they haven't been able to easily get anything new imported. So they just been fixing and patching up everything they could to make things work. Right. So, yeah, I think that was partially lifted, but I don't know how much or whether that's gone back. Okay. All right. Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, I hope that's because everything makes sense, not because you guys haven't read or watched the video. Okay. And let's see. So Camilla's pointing out that the Congress has to approve any elimination of embargo with Cuba. So that is, yeah, I don't know if that is true or not, because I haven't looked into that, but that's probably the case. But we'll talk about more in the next chapter that the president actually has a lot of power in making trade decisions, because we changed that law in the 1970s. It used to be that Congress had to approve everything related to trade, but we know how fast our Congress works. So that was really killing a lot of good opportunities for trade. And so in the 1970s, we passed a law giving the president the power to negotiate trade deals, and then all the president needs to do is to give Congress a notice about what he or she is doing, and they have 90 days to to say no. And if in 90 days they don't get to it, then it'll go forward. So that's a little bit different. Okay. All right. Now, okay, so if you go into your Canvas course, and in the module called Chapter 4, the last thing is something called Chapter 4 exercise. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is to put you into breakout rooms, and I want you to work on this exercise because this is going to prepare you for your supplemental homework and your exam. Okay, so this will be very similar to the type of questions that you will see and have to work with. Okay, and this is an example of the U.S. With our imports on steel. Okay, and we're a large country. So go ahead and find that document. Again, it's in Canvas in the module for Chapter 4, the very last document. Okay, so I'm gonna put you into breakout rooms, and you guys try to work on this together. Okay, and I'll give you sufficient time to do so, and then bring you back and then compare answers and walk you through this. Okay. All right. Did anybody, is anybody having trouble finding the document? You're all good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and you guys go and work on this together. Then I'll hop in and out of different rooms, but if you have a question, just send me a message really quick, and then that will give me a notification. I'll jump in to help you. Okay, and I'll give you at least 15 minutes to see if it's sufficient. If not, I might give you some more at that point. But if you're all done and you think you got all the right answers, go ahead and come back to the main room. Okay.
Hey, Brother Ma, are these like questions like 6, 6 and 7 on the homework assignment, like about large nations and small nations?
You mean yeah. So if you had I don't remember the exact questions in your homework, but yeah, if you had a question, then because large nations and small nations, their tariffs, the effects work differently. So yeah, this is exactly the kind of question to prepare you for that. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Lucas, Precious, or Lucas is gone. Okay, Precious and Lindsay. And I guess Lindsay and Jason, you guys are using the same Zoom, but you're probably in the different things. Huh? Okay. Okay, as you can see that when you guys were in your rooms, I drew this similar graph on my iPad, so you can see it. It's not a perfect replica, but gives you the gist of things. Okay, so the setup, let's just review this really quick and make sure everybody is on the same page. We have the US being a large country importing steel. Okay, and then I gave you the table showing you at different prices what the US domestic supply quantity is and what is the US quantity demanded is, and then the world plus US supply, and then the world plus US supply with tariff. Okay, now some of you asked me, well, the graph doesn't line up with the table because the graph, the curves stop at the price 200, but you have numbers going up as high as 300. Okay, well, by now you should know that your supply and demand curves always start from the vertical axis, from where prices, they always go all the way to the price where quantity reduces to zero. So even if I only show you a section of your demand curve here, and it looks like it stopped at 200, but you should know it extends all the way up to 300 and hits the vertical axis right there, okay? Because demand curves and supply curves don't just magically appear in the middle of your market. That you have quantities that reduce to zero at certain prices, okay? So that's in fact why I put this table there, because in the past, when there was no table, students would get totally confused and not be able to proceed by looking at the graph and not remembering that these curves start from quantity zero. And so the reason I put that table there is to help remind you, hey, the curves are not the whole thing, so you need to be able to extend this, okay? But anyway, so you have all this information, and then I drew this graph in this screen I'm sharing with you. The first question says, under autarky, how much steel does the US produce, consume, and import? Okay, so and what would the price be? Hopefully this is easy for you to answer. Autarky, if you remember from your reading and the video, means you don't trade with anybody, okay? When you don't trade with anybody, then your own domestic demand right here and your domestic supply right here, they are the only forces in the market that that determine where the market is, okay? So then this, point right here is your market equilibrium. As you can see at this point, okay, your quantity is 150. So this is how much you produce and consume, because you're only doing it domestically, and the price is also 150. Okay, so if you are in autarky, then we produce 150,000 tons. Remember, this is measured in thousands, okay? And we also consume 150,000 tons. Our import is what at this point? How much do we import?
Zero.
If you're in autarky,
None.
zero, okay? And then your price is at 150. And everybody with me so far, that's the answer to A1. Okay, so hopefully you had no trouble getting this part. And then 2 says calculate the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. Okay, so at this point, the consumer surplus is the triangle that's above 150 and under your demand curve. So since your demand curve here, you don't have the room to draw the curve all the way up, but you should know it's this triangle. So to calculate this triangle, you need to do the height over here and times the base over here divided by 2, right? The height, if you look at the table, you can see your demand curve will reduce the quantity to 0 at the price of 300, okay? So the consumer surplus then is the height, which is, well, let me go down here. So this is A2, okay? So consumer surplus is the height, which is 300 minus your market price of 150, which gives you the height, okay? So 300 minus 150 times the base, which is the quantity, and quantity here is 150. Okay, then don't forget to divide it by 2. Okay, and if you do that, then you'll get the answer, and that is going to be, okay, whoops, okay, 11,250. But remember, quantities measured in thousands of, so it's 150,000 here. So you can put a K here, or you can add 3 zeros, or you can say all answers measured in thousands, but don't forget that part, because if you don't do the thousands, then on a test with a question like this, you're gonna get marked for it, right? Because it's not $11,000, it's $11,250,000 or $11,250,000, okay? All right, everybody with me so far? Okay, producer surplus then is this height right here times the same base divided by 2. Okay, so your producer surplus is the height of the triangle, which is the price of 150 minus where quantity supplied reduces to 0, which is at the price of 50. So that gives you the height of that triangle times the base, which is again the quantity of 150,000, okay, divided by half. And if you do that, you're gonna get, okay, 7,500,000. Okay. All right. So far, any questions? That makes sense? Okay, did you get the same numbers? Did you remember the thousands?
Yeah. Speaking of the thousands, for consumer surplus, I got 11,250,000,000.
It shouldn't be billion, because
I think it's I think because of the 150K times the 150K. That's
no. This
The price isn't
this first one is
150K.
not 150K. This one is the price of 150 right here.
oh okay.
Okay, that's not,
There we
yeah,
go. That's my problem.
because you were supposed to go from, 300 is where your demand curve connects to the vertical axis. So 300 minus 150 is this 300 and this 150 right here. Okay, it is not the quantity of 150.
Yeah, that was my issue.
Yeah, you're calculating this distance right here. Okay, so yeah, so there's no billion here. Okay, but I'm glad he asked, because we need to catch mistakes like this. Okay. All right, any other questions or comments?
Where are we getting the 300 from?
Okay,
Right.
so if you remember here, let me share this screen. Okay, so 300 is right here, right? We said at 300, quantity demand is 0. That tells you that's where your demand curve will connect to if we had a bigger graph and kept extending this. Okay, so
Okay.
that's where this is. This is exactly the piece of information giving you that hint, okay, and giving you how to calculate your consumer surplus in that case. That makes sense? Okay, all right. Okay, so then let me go back to sharing this other screen. Okay, all right. Now, so that's part A, okay? Part B says, let me go find the question, scroll it down. Now, if the US trades steel freely, okay, how much steel does the US produce, consume, and import, and what would the price be? So if we trade freely, that is where the world and US supply right here becomes our market supply, because we allow the rest of the world to come in with no restrictions. So the world plus domestic supply curve will give you where our new market supply is, and wherever that crosses your demand curve gives you where the market needs to be. So this is where we are market equilibrium is. So you can see that we're buying 225,000 tons of steel, and the price is going to be at 75. But okay, at this price of a 75, we're buying 225. However, domestic supply, okay, at this price, quantity supplied is right here. And I didn't draw this graph, clear, I mean, with more lines like you in the original graph I gave you. In the original graph, you'll see this is at 37.5. Okay, that's the, let me verify that. Yeah, that is the quantity. So 37,500 tons of steel produced domestically because the price is now lower than before. So at a lower price, U.S. steel makers are producing less. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay, so for answers to B1, you know, how much does the U.S. produce? 37.5 thousand. Okay, consume 225,000, and import is the difference between the two, which is you know, 187,500. Okay, and the price is $75. Okay, everybody with me? So the amount of import is 225 minus 37.5. How much we buy minus how much domestic producers make. The difference is what we buy from other countries. We call that imports. Right? Okay. Good. All right. Okay. He says now, B2 says calculate the consumer and producer surplus now. Okay. Well, now your consumer surplus is the previous consumer surplus plus all this other, you know, area under your demand curve to this point. Let's call this point, you know, B, if we call this original one A. Okay, so it's everything above the price of 75 and under the demand curve to point B. Okay, that's your consumer surplus. Okay, because consumers are paying at a much lower price of $75 and they're buying 225,000 tons of steel, right? And that gives you that huge area as your consumer surplus. So if you do the math, then your B2 says consumer surplus now is 300, where demand begins, minus 75, which is where the current price, right? So 300 to 75, we're talking about this gigantic distance vertically now, okay? So that's the height of your triangle times the base of your triangle, which is the quantity people consume, so 225K, then divided by half. And if you do the math here, then that is going to give you, okay, 25,312.5 K, or another word, 25,312,500. Okay, however you want to express that. Okay, so that's a dollar sign. Okay, everybody with me of how we got to the consumer surplus? Okay, now producer surplus. Okay, producer surplus got squished down to this little tiny triangle right here. That's it. Okay, that's the U.S. domestic producer surplus. So as a result, okay, your producer surplus now is the height of the triangle, which is $75 minus 50. Okay, that's this little height right here for your triangle, times the base, which is your quantity produced by domestic producers, 37.5, okay, times 1/2, and that gives you, okay, $468,750. So it's easier to write it out than having a 468.75K. So that's why I wrote it out. But if you got 468.75K, that's fine too. Excuse me. Okay, any questions about that part?
Just super quick question. So if we were calculating the consumer surplus of the US and the world, then would we do it with that smaller?
You don't have the world demand here, so you cannot calculate the consumer surplus of the world. Okay.
Okay.
You only have the US market here, so you can only do the US. Okay. All right. Okay, so now let me see if I can somehow clean this up before we get to the next part, which can be tricky. Wish me luck.
Just to confirm, so you said if you don't have the world, demand, then you can't calculate the world surplus.
That's correct.
Okay.
Because you don't know where, what is the price for quantity demanded to be zero in the world, and how much is the total consumption in the world. You don't know that, right? So we only look at one country at a time,
Gotcha.
unless you have all the world information, which
That's good to know.
yeah, you don't really care about anybody except your own country from the analysis perspective we're trying to do. Okay. Okay, not too bad. All right. Okay, so I think that's as good as I can get it. So hopefully it looks a lot cleaner now. All right, so now let's look at C. I think that's where most people had trouble. Okay, I'll show this graph and then just read C to you, or you can look at C on your screen if that's what you're looking at. It says, now suppose the US imposes a $35 per ton tariff on imported steel. Okay, now again, I hope you actually read the book carefully and watched the video, followed along carefully instead of just letting it play in the background and numbing your mind. Okay. When we say we have a $35 tariff, okay, what is going to happen is that we know that will shift our market supply, which is now world plus US supply, because we are open to trade. Even with the tariff, we're still open to trade, but we're going to shift it up parallel by the size of $35. Okay, so whenever you have a tariff imposed, that is going to shift your supply curve vertically up by the size of the tariff. Okay, however much it is. Now, we talked about the different types of tariffs in the video, and that still applies. If it's a 10% tariff, then that will still shift your curve up by whatever 10% of the price is. So it's still a vertical shift by the size of the tariff. Now, to make your life simple, usually we just use a dollar amount for the tariff, so you know exactly how much to shift it, but the same principle will always apply. Whatever the tariff is, will shift your supply curve upward by that size, okay, vertically. Okay, so remember that, and then that's how you got the new, that green, dark green curve of world plus US supply with tariff right here. Okay, that's how we got this green curve. Now, okay, the question says, determine the domestic price, production, consumption, and imports of steel under this tariff. So you can see now, point C is your equilibrium, right? And because the dark green line is our market supply now, so where it crosses the US demand is our equilibrium. And you can see at point C, our consumption is 200 right here. Okay, that's how much we're buying steel, okay? And price is at 100, okay? And then quantity produced domestically, okay? And again, this one doesn't show all the little lines, but if you were to go back to your original graph with more detailed lines, you can see this is 75. So that means at this new equilibrium point C, okay, we're consuming 200 and domestically producing 75. So that means we're importing 200 minus 75, which is 125. And the price is at $100 per ton as a result of the tariff. Okay, everybody with me?
Wait, so we're still only producing 75 even at equilibrium C?
Right, because the way to find it is to go from your equilibrium price of 100, right? So C tells you what the price is, which is 100. Then wherever your price crosses your domestic supply, you come down from that point, and that's how much you're producing domestically.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so this is, if we call this point D is where 100 crosses your US supply, right? And that then you come down from point D, that is where your domestic quantity supplied is.
That's my bad. I got the price and the supply mixed up. I
Okay.
apologize.
All right, no problem. Yep. Okay. So the imports, yeah, like it's 125. Oh, you guys are quick in answering that question. So yeah, that's from the consumption of 200 right here minus how much we produce domestically. So we buy 200, and out of the 275 was produced by our own producers. So the difference is what we imported. Okay. All right. Okay. Any questions about C1? I think that part hopefully is making sense. Okay. Now C2 and the rest of these is where I think most people have trouble. Okay. And that's where I spent quite a bit of time in the video to explain in detail, because reading that part might be confusing in the book. So I was trying to go through it carefully. Okay, so let's go through that again here, because clearly a lot of you were having trouble with this part, but you are expected to be able to do this on your own. Okay, so when we went from point B to point C as our equilibrium, okay, when we increased our tariff, when we went from 0 free trade to $35 tariff, our line shifted up. We went from B to C. As a result, okay, consumers lost the entire area of A, B, okay, C, and little d as consumer surplus, right? Because A, B, C, and D used to be part of consumer surplus, because we said consumer surplus was the triangle above the price of 75 all the way up to 300 under the US demand curve. Now at point C, your consumer surplus is the triangle above the price of a 100. So consumers lost A, B, C, and D, right? Everybody with me so far? Okay, so A is what we call redistributive effect, because you can see now our domestic producer surplus, okay, let me change it to a different color, hot pink, okay? Our domestic producer surplus is this whole area. And compared to the little black triangle that we had underneath 75, so A is the addition to our producer surplus. So that means consumers lost A, but A went to producers. It got redistributed within the market. So that's why we call A the redistributive effect. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now you need to just figure out how to calculate A. Well, the way to do that is, let's see, you can see it's a weird shape, but you can do A as a rectangle right here, plus a triangle right here. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. And if you do that, okay, redistributive effect of A, okay, I'll give you the answer. So the rectangle plus the triangle will equal to 1,406,000. So I'll just write it here. A equals 1,406,250. Okay, because again, it's this it's a rectangle plus the triangle. Okay, and so it's 25. The vertical distance is 25 here. Right, it's 100 minus 75, and then this distance right here is 37.5, and then this distance is another 37.5, because it's 75 minus 37.5, so 37.5. So you have all these values, you can calculate the area of A. Now, any questions about how to calculate the area of A, or you're okay with knowing the answer key and how to calculate it? Do you want me to actually write it out? You're good?
I just have a quick question, Brother Mom.
Sure, Coulter, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious because I know you said that, so that A is being redistributed and it's with the producer surplus. So the final answer for the redistributive effect isn't added to the previous producer surplus. It's just its own thing.
Right, because the previous producer surplus was what the producers earning already, and it's not redistributed from consumers to them, right?
So it's already, so it's just saying what's going from consumer surplus to the new producer surplus.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, the redistributive effect only measures what is going from consumers to producers. Okay, Connor?
So there, I don't know if it's just me, but I found another way to calculate it. You just find the new area of the larger triangle and subtract what you originally had.
Absolutely, that works too. So you can calculate the whole new producer surplus, the bigger triangle of, this triangle right here, 100 minus 50, and then the 75 right here, okay? And then minus the old producer surplus of this little triangle we used the black line to mark before. That completely, that will give you exactly the same answer as well. Okay, thank you, Connor. Yeah, so that might be an easier way for some of you. Okay, so that's A. Then it also asks you for the consumption effect, the protective effect, and the revenue effect. So B is what we call the consumption effect. So B and D together, okay, B plus D is what we call the deadweight loss, right? Because these are areas for consumer surplus that consumers lost, but nobody picked up, right? Okay, so it's a pure loss. So B is lost, B is lost and to what we call the protective effect. Sorry, I misspoke just now. B is the protective effect because, okay, what happens is with the tariff, you can see the price went from 75 up to 100, right? Because we went from point B to point C because of the tariff. So the price increase from 75 to 100 allowed this additional production to happen. We were producing at 37.5, now we're producing at 75,000. So all this additional production happened in the US because of the higher price. However, okay, this production should not happen because this production happened on, change to a different color, running out of colors here. Let's use gray. This production happened on this stretch of your supply curve. And if you look at this stretch, remember the supply curve, if you remember from your Econ 150 days, your supply curve is your marginal cost curve, okay? So this new production on this, gray section of the supply curve, they all have a marginal cost that is higher than $75, which is the free trade price. So what this is saying that we are spending more money to produce this amount of steel at the cost that we can buy the steel from. So we're spending $100 to make a ton of steel that we could buy for 75 bucks from Canada or wherever we're importing it. So if that's the case, every time we produce a ton of steel, we lose 25 bucks because you're spending $100 to make something you could buy for 75. So you're wasting $25 of resources when that happens, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So B measures the total loss from this additional production that should not have happened. Okay. So we call that the protective effect because it is wasting our resources to produce things at a higher cost than the world price. And that really is, just throwing resources down the drain for nothing, okay? So B measures that. B is your protective effect. So if you calculate the size of B, which is a little triangle, you'll get that B equals, I'll give you the answer, $468,750, okay? Now, D is called the consumption effect because, okay, let me change to this color, because again, when price rises from 75 to 100, all these consumers right here in this purple section no longer are consuming. They got pushed out of the market, right? Because they used to be able to buy steel Now the price is higher than what they're willing to pay. If you remember, your demand curve measures your top willingness to pay for something. And all these consumers in the purple section of your demand curve can no longer afford buying steel. So they got pushed out of the market because of the higher price. And when they got pushed out, their consumer surplus is lost, it's gone. They no longer get the consumer surplus because they're no longer consuming. So D measures their loss, okay? So if you calculate that little triangle of D, the consumption effect is going to be $312,500. Okay? Any questions about how we got here? Okay, make sense? All right. So now the only thing left is C. C is part of what we call revenue effect, okay? However, with a large country, what's going on here is you can see that, well, the tariff is $35, but price only went up by $25, right? So what's going on here? Well, what happens here is that because our country is such a large country in this market, when we impose a $35 tariff, foreign producers don't dare to raise their price by whole $35 because they fear they will lose too much market share in the US. Okay, so what they do is then they take a hit. They raise the price by part of the tariff, and then they will take a hit by paying part of the tariff with you so that they don't lose as much market share. So as a result, a $35 tariff here only raised your consumer price by 25. So that means, okay, how much the foreign producers is getting, okay, is 65. Okay, so because you can see this vertical distance here, that's the whole $35, but this part right here is only 25. So that tells you there's a $10 hit that got taken by foreign producers. Does that make sense? Okay, so we call this little area E, okay? So C plus E is your revenue effect. Because together they measure how much tariff the government gets to collect, right? Because let me change it to another color. Let's see, what can we use?
And Brother Ma, is it the whole, like, is it that whole square of
Yep.
C, or is it just that little triangle above the New
No,
World
so
plus
this
US
is
supply
C.
to tariff?
Okay, so this is C.
Oh, and then
Okay.
that's E.
And then this is E.
Okay, perfect. I just want to
Okay.
make sure we're getting the
Yep.
area of like a square, not a triangle.
Yeah, it's not a triangle. Okay, so
Okay,
the
perfect.
reason, the reason for this is because remember, tariff is a tax that's only applied to imports, right? So you are importing this much. You're importing 200 minus 75, so you are importing 125,000 tons of steel, and then you are charging this whole, $35 per ton. So 35 times 120K then tells you how many dollars of tariff the government gets to charge, right? So C plus E is the total for your revenue effect, but C, okay, let me just write it down. Okay, I'm running out of room here. Okay, so C equals 25 times 125K. Then E equals 10 times 125K. So together, they equal the revenue effect, okay? So together, then your revenue effect, if you calculate the whole thing, it equals 4 million. So this equals 4 million, $375,000. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so we have two more questions we want to answer really quick. I apologize for going probably a couple minutes over, but the next question then says, well, how much of the tariff revenue comes from domestic consumers? And that is part C, right? Because C measures the consumer price going from 75 to 100. So that is what American consumers are paying. Okay. But then E tells you how much the foreign exporters are giving you. So you just need to figure out what these two part equal to. Okay. And then what do we call the portion that comes from the foreign exporters, part E? That is called the terms of trade effect. Okay, that has a name, and we talked about it in the video, and you should have read it in the book. Okay, terms of trade effect is called E. Then finally, the question says, determine the overall welfare loss to the U.S. under the import tariff, and if this tariff is it improving? Is this a welfare improving tariff, and why might it be called a beggar thy neighbor tariff? So the way to look is to remember the tariff caused the deadweight loss of B plus D, but we are getting E from foreign countries, right? E is a gain because foreign producers are selling their products to America at a cheaper than market price level. So to determine whether our overall welfare is improving or not, okay, so let me do C and 4, then we're comparing E to B plus D, whether it's greater than, equal to, or less than. Okay, if E is greater than B plus D, then we actually gain with this tariff because we're gaining more from foreign producers than the deadweight loss we're creating. If E equals to it, we break even. There's no change to our welfare. And if E is less than B plus D, that is when we have a pure loss caused by this tariff. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you calculated this, and you'll see that E is 1,205,250,000, and B and D together, okay, is less than that. So B was so if you do B plus D right here, these two added together, you can see is less than 1.25 million, and so that means E is actually greater. Okay, E is greater than B plus D. So your terms of trade effect is greater than deadweight loss. So we are actually improving welfare. But we call this beggar thy neighbor tariff because our gain is at the loss of our trading partners, right? We gained E because they lost E. They had to take a hit because of our decision to impose a tariff. So we call that beggar thy neighbor tariff, okay, because we gain at the loss of our neighbors or trading partners. Okay. All right. Okay. So any questions before I let you go?
Thank you very much for going through that, Brother Mo.
What? Sorry, you guys are talking at the same time. I couldn't hear either one. Taylor,
I was going to say, what are we going to do individual quiz 3 on our own then?
No, the quizzes will be next time. We'll do the quiz for chapter 4 and chapter 5 next time in class. Okay.
Okay. So the individual quiz that's due today